Hello, my name is Stephen Thomas, and I want to speak about the age of the universe. How old is the cosmos? Now, many Christians who read the Bible believe that God created the world 6,000 years ago, and He did it in a week, which we call the Creation Week. Yet, scientists, on the other hand, believe in the Big Bang, and according to the latest science, the universe is about 13.75 billion years old. And the Big Bang occurred in a whole series of events, which included a sudden appearance of energy, the sudden appearance of the four dimensions, length, breadth, height, and even time appeared. And then the universe started expanding. At first there was the super inflationary period in which it expanded very fast. And then this energy, according to Einstein, turned into subatomic particles, quarks, leptons, muons, gluons, etc. And then the subatomic particles gathered together as time passed, fractions of a second passed, and eventually they formed the particles which we know as the protons, neutrons, and electrons, and eventually those gathered together into atoms. And eventually gravity started to exert a force, and it produced the first atoms of hydrogen and helium, which gathered together as dust and eventually formed stars. And after about 1 billion years, we were supposed to have our first galaxies. And then the sun and our solar system and the moon only came into existence about 9 billion years after the Big Bang. In other words, about 4.5 billion years ago, and then it took about 1 billion years to cool, and then slowly about 3.5 billion years ago we got the first life on Earth. Now that is the history of the cosmos according to science. And the moon was formed when some large Earth-sized planet hit into Earth, banged into Earth, knocked off the moon. There was a whole lot of dust that gathered together, spinning around the Earth, and became the moon. And then only slowly did life appear, and at first the Earth was supposedly very poor in oxygen, so then the first tiny little diatoms and algae started to produce oxygen, and slowly our Earth became more oxygen rich, and then finally, only much later after that, could large animals survive on Earth. So that is how science explains it. And yet, if we go back to the Bible says that on day 1 God said, "Let there be light." On day 2 God separated the waters, the clouds above and the sea below, and He made the sky. And with day 3 land appeared, and God created the angiosperms for the first time, which is the flowering plants and fruits. Then on day 4 lights appeared in the sky. In other words, you could see the stars and the moon and the sun. This was for seasons. And then on day 5 fish and fowl appeared. That is, God populated the sky and the waters. Day 6 God populated the land animals and created Adam and Eve. And on day 7 God rested. So in 7 literal days God is supposed to have created the universe. Now, how do we reconcile the Bible and science? And I'm about to try and show you how I have no cognitive dissonance in believing both this, the Big Bang theory, and the Creation Week. They are not incompatible. How do we put the two together? Well, if you look at the account in Genesis, if you look at it carefully, this is not the first time that life is appearing on Earth. I do believe that 6,000 years ago God created Adam and Eve and placed them in the Garden of Eden, and then according to Bishop Ussher you can work out that Adam begat Seth, Seth begat Enos, Enos begat Canaan, and Adam was so old when he begat Seth, and Seth was so old when he begat Enos, and Enos was so old when he begat Canaan, and you can go all the way down and you can work out that since Adam only 6,000 years or so has passed. So how do we reconcile the two? Well, if you take it that this is only the last of a number of creations of God. God has created many, many times. And we see that in the fossil record. We in science talk about them as mass extinctions. There are many mass extinctions in the fossil record. And the creation of man 6,000 years ago was accompanied 1,600 years later by another mass extinction, which we call the biblical flood. And then after the biblical flood, we have men living on. And then the Bible talks about another mass extinction which is to occur in the end time. We call that the end time, the Great Tribulation. In one plague alone, which is in Revelation, it talks about the fourth seal, 1/4 of the earth's population dies. So the end time is what in science we would call a mass extinction. And then we're supposed to get the millennium. And then 2 Peter 10 and 12 talk about a time when the elements will melt and there'll be a new heavens and a new earth. So there's another mass extinction. So the Bible, in fact, definitely mentions 3 mass extinctions. The flood, the return of Christ, which is accompanied by a mass extinction. And after the millennium, when the elements melt, there's a new heaven, new earth, new species, new everything. That's a 3rd mass extinction. So it is clear when you read the Genesis account that a mass extinction has occurred and the earth has become without form and void. Let us start in the beginning with Genesis. And I'm going to quote from the Hebrew, excuse my Hebrew, but we have to look at the actual Hebrew to see there's one little word that is mistranslated, and that causes all the confusion. So it says, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Now in the Hebrew it says, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'ha'aretz. And it's saying, Bereshit, in beginning, not in the beginning, in a beginning. No definite article. Or to begin with. Elohim, gods, not just singular God. An im word, when it ends with im, means plural. And 1 John 1 explains this. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And by him were all things created. So it's talking about gods created the heavens, shamayim. There's again the im, the heavens, v'ha'eretz, and the earth. And then in Genesis 1 verse 2, v'ha'eretz heita tohu v'bohu. And the earth was or became without form and void. Now that is so interesting. Was the earth created without form and void, or did the earth become without form and void? Tohu v'bohu. So the Hebrew words for without form and void is tohu and bohu. And then when you actually look in Isaiah 18 verse 45, I believe it is, Isaiah 45 verse 18, it says, for thus says the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it. He has established it. He created it not in vain, or in other words, not tohu. So when God created the world, it was not created tohu. It became tohu. So what we are looking at the start of Genesis 1 verse 1 is God recreating and repopulating and replenishing the earth. He is forming it again after there was some devastating event that left the earth in total darkness. He didn't create tohu, it became tohu. It was just one of many mass extinctions which there have been throughout the geological record. And if you want to know some of those mass extinctions which occur, mass extinctions are periods of time when most species or a lot of species die out. There was a huge mass extinction at the Ordovician-Silurian boundary, which is in the fossil record. The late Devonian extinction, a huge number of species died out. The Permian Triassic extinction, 95% of all species died out. The Triassic extinction also caused a huge destruction, and we know that about 85 million years ago, when we had the KT boundary, or the Cretaceous Tertiary extinction, when the dinosaurs died due to a huge meteor or something hitting into the earth, we had that mass extinction, and then the mammals came on the scene. So if we take it that the earth's history is riddled with mass extinctions, and the Bible talks about mass extinctions, if we accept that Genesis 1 verse 1, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth became without form and void, then we can understand that this whole cosmology occurred, as scientists explain, 13.75 billion years ago. And then the cosmos developed, and finally the earth cooled, and 3.5 billion years ago animals were living on earth, but not the same animals as today. And then finally, 6,000 years ago, we have the latest creation of God, which is the modern world, all the modern plants and animals which we see here today on earth. And Genesis 1 verse 2 onwards is explaining how in 7 days, it took God 7 days, or 1 literal week, for him to create all the modern plants and animals and place Adam and Eve on earth. And I think very convincing evidence is when you look for human civilizations, you go back to the ancient Babylonians or Egyptians or Greeks, those civilizations are not much more than 6,000 years old. Beyond that, we just get what are cave paintings and what we would call Stone Age, things which are almost impossible to date. And there's a slight flaw, I believe, with carbon dating, but not much. And carbon dating relies upon the amount of cosmic radiation remaining constant, and if it was less in the past, things would appear older. But even carbon-14 dating doesn't contradict the age of man being 6,000 more or less years on Earth that human civilization has developed. And as I say, carbon-14 dating has got its inaccuracies. But if we accept that Adam and Eve were placed on Earth 6,000 years ago as just one of many creations by God, but this is perhaps his most important one, we obviously believe, where mankind was allowed to develop. Well, God wiped mankind out after 1,600 years, and then he started again after the biblical flood. So there's a mass extinction. But the Hebrew word there in Genesis 1 verse 2, and the earth became, or was, hater, was or became without form and void. Even the New International Version says could be, became. It's just one possible way of translating it. Either the earth was created this way or it became that way. And we've already seen from Isaiah 45:18 that it must have become this way. And then what happens is in 6 literal days, God says, let there be light, because the whole world has descended into darkness. So he thins the atmosphere, the sky separates from the waters, the earth's covered with water. Then dry land appears, so God then pushes the land up through the water, or separates the water from the land. He plants the land with plants, the modern plants, the angiosperms, and fruiting plants, which had not existed before Adam. Then he clears the sky even more so that you can see the sun and the moon, which were there. They weren't created at this time, but the darkness is thinned so that you can see it. He creates the fish and the fowl on one day. He creates Adam and then puts him to sleep, and from his rib he creates Eve, literally, on the Friday, and then God rests on the literal Sabbath, Saturday. So this creation week did occur 6,000 years ago, and this Big Bang did occur 13.7 billion years ago, and mass extinctions have occurred throughout the Earth's history, and there will be future mass extinctions according to the Bible, and there have been, and the literal creation of mankind and the modern era occurred literally 6,000 years ago. And it all depends on that one translation of one little word. Quite easily it can be, and the earth became or was without form and void, and the earth obviously became without form and void due to a mass extinction. And then God replenished it with Adam and Eve and told them to replenish the earth, which is what we see today.